And then the next thing we're going to do now is to create a connection type for MySQLi. So I'm going to come here and the new class, I'm going to say MySQLi connection. So just like the PDO one, it's going to extend the abstract connection. Then it's going to implement the connection interface. And then I'm going to just inject all of the required methods. Okay, so we have pass credentials, we have connect, and we have get connection. So we need a constant here to define the keys that we need. So we can say const required connection keys should be equal to an array. So right here, I'm going to paste the one for MySQL. The database is going to be the same. The fetch method is going to be MySQLi associative array. And that's all we need to do here. We now need to come back again inside of the MySQLi connection class. So we're going to have the same test for the MySQLi connection. So let's first of all grab this. So this is going to be the same for both because this is taking place inside of the abstract class. So we just need basically these two methods. So let's come here and paste it here. And then we can rename these to be MySQLi. MySQLi. And this should also be MySQLi. Now we can change this to MySQLi connection. And we can just call this handler. Then return this. And then here, let's change this to MySQLi. And this also to be MySQLi. So let's run the test suite again. And here we have two failures. It can connect to database with MySQLi API. Fail asserting that null is an instance of interface, database connection interface. And also the second one, it is a valid MySQLi connection. Fail asserting that PDO object is an instance of MySQLi class MySQLi. So something's wrong with our test there. I think the annotation, yes, so this annotation should be referencing this test case. And if we run it again, we should get the correct type of error. Okay, so what we can now do is to get back again to the test editor and now begin to quickly just write the functionality for that of MySQLi connection. Okay, so for the required key, let's come here and just grab them. I'm going to grab all of this. And then come back here and just paste it here. And as before, we want to remove the values and just leave the keys only. And then we also want to pass the credentials. So for MySQLi, we can just do a simple return, and then we can then say credentials. Remember, we need to still follow the exact order which MySQLi will expect us to pass in the credentials. So we'll look at the, we're going to have a look at the class shortly, but for now, let's just prepare this. And then here we can say, or I could actually just duplicate it. So we basically need 4 things to connect here. The next one will be db_username. And then let's just grab from here, db user password. Then the last one should be the name of the database, so db name. Okay, so when we are connecting using MySQLi, when we're using the object-oriented approach, we need to pass in the host name, pass in the username, pass in the password of the user who's trying to connect to the database, and then the name of the database. Okay, so let's come back here, and then here we're going to say return this connection. And then we can actually say here that the connection should be MySQLi. We type into this to be MySQLi. Okay, I want to move this to the top and add it as a use statement. MySQLi. We also want to use MySQLi driver. And then here I can remove this. Okay, so basically we have a pass credential returning an array, and then we also have a connect method which we now need to actually program. Okay, so this should return MySQLi connection. Then we can just come here and say return this. So the first thing we want to do here, we want to ensure that we are able to actually undo exceptions properly. So we're going to say the driver be equal to new MySQLi driver. And then we can then set the exception state that we want for this MySQL connection. So we want it to report exception. So we can say report mode should be equal to constant. So there are defined constant for MySQLi. So MySQL underscore report street. Okay, so let's set it to street. Then we can put a pipe, then MySQL underscore report error. Then the next thing that we will need here will be our credentials. So let's prepare the credentials. Should be equal to this pass credentials, and then we can pass it these credentials. Always remember that our credentials will be passed in whenever we instantiate this class, MySQLi connection, and then pass it the array of connection credentials that will now be properly prepared by the abstract connection, which will assign it to the property these credentials. So that's what we're doing on line 19 here. And then finally what we want here now will be a try catch block. So we want to catch a throwable. Save this in a variable called exception. And then here we can throw exception if something goes wrong. Throw a new database connection exception. We can pass it the exception message. And then we can also pass it extra data. So we want to say this credentials, and then we can also pass in a status code of 500. So we can also come here and say use throwable. Just so I don't like putting the backslash here. So you always see me most of the time removing that. So what we now want here is to say this connection is equal to new MySQLi. And then we can pass it this credential, which is the credential that we're getting back from pass credential method. All right, so if we look at the MySQLi class declaration, takes the host name, username, password, and the database name. So basically these are the 4 things that we're interested in, and it should be in that order. So if we come back to pass credentials, host, username, password, and database name. So now if we run the test, it should pass. If it doesn't pass, then we're going to try and fix anything. So let's look at our diagram again and see what we've accomplished. So right here we have one part of the diagram completed. Okay, so we have all the parts dealing with connecting to the database completed. We are now left with the query builder part. This is now going to be focused on how we insert data, how we update data, and also how we query data from the database. So we now have an abstraction, which is the database connection abstraction. And we provide support for basically 2 drivers. All right, I'll see you in the next lecture.